I'm going to tell you why Islamic financing is a scam, how I, as a husband and a father of 5 kids, was living my entire life with renting and avoiding mortgages, avoiding working for banks, avoiding working for insurance companies and anything to do with finance. I'm going to tell you how many Muslims continue to suffer and struggle their entire lives because they don't want to be on Allah's bad side. Riba, which is often translated as usury, has one of its forms, which is interest. I'm going to show you how interest is forbidden in Islam and how this ends up being a detriment on many people's lives. And I'm going to show you how a conventional mortgage is far more beneficial for both the bank and the person buying the house. Let's get started. One of the strangest oddities is that Islam as a religion actually bans interest completely. Now, you may be asking, is he right about that? That seems very strange. And why would Islam do that? It's quite possible Prophet Muhammad considered that interest was a bad thing because he saw some examples of usury in his own lifetime and he decided to throw the whole thing out. Now, this is an example of throwing out the baby with the bath water. Because of this, because of completely forbidding interest, what's happened is it causes a lot of harm to many practicing Muslims. Many practicing Muslims suffer their entire lives living in mediocrity because they cannot buy a house on mortgage. I am arguing here that this rule of banning interest is bad for humanity. And in particular, this rule is actually harming Muslims that follow it. I will give you actual financial numbers and show you an example of an Islamic mortgage, a so-called Islamic mortgage, versus a conventional mortgage, and how the conventional mortgage is far superior by every means. Let's get to it. Okay, so to start, what is riba? The hadith says in Sunnah of Nasai, the Messenger of Allah said, gold for gold, weight for weight, like for like, and silver for silver, weight for weight, like for like. Whoever gives more or takes more has engaged in riba. Okay? And just one more hadith. The Prophet cursed the lady who practices tattooing, and so on, and so on, and so on. The one who eats riba and the one who gives it. And then it goes on to some other things which are forbidden. So there's several hadith on the matter, and I'll just give you some actual fatwas. Now, this is from a Salafi website. The question is, here in UK, to buy a house, you have to take a mortgage. And then he explains why he has to do that. Is it better for me because the house will be mine, and if it's not, then what's the best way to do it? Answer, praise be to Allah. Dealing with riba is haram according to Quran and Sunnah and scholarly consensus. So it is not permissible to do that, no matter how great the need. The fact that a person may need a house or a car or to get married or any other need does not give him the excuse to do something that Allah has forbidden. The Muslim has to fear Allah and remember that He is always watching. He should prefer the hereafter to this life. If he finds someone that will lend him the money, then all well and good. If he cannot find anyone who will do that, he can borrow from a Muslim, taking a loan with no interest involved. Problem solved. Just find a Muslim who will lend you the money interest-free for your house. If he cannot find anyone to lend him money, then he should be patient in hope of earning reward. Whoever gives up something for Allah, Allah will compensate with something better than that. For example, poverty and misery in this life and having to suffer under living under someone else's house with someone else's rules under a landlord. But of course, Allah will make up for that later. Now, just to show that this is not limited only to Salafis, I'm going to show you a Hanafi opinion. House mortgages in the West, answered according to Hanafi Fiqh by darulifta.com. Can we take out a mortgage? It is both financially advantageous and avoids a lot of immigration headaches for close relatives. So basically, someone can come to your house, they can stay with you, whatever. There's no rules, right? It's more flexible. You can actually gift it. You You can do whatever you want. It's your house, right? And then someone's saying, and then they asked about interest-free mortgages based on ijara, and I'm going to get into the Islamic mortgages. And then, answer, in the name of Allah, the most compassionate, the most merciful, the most demanding, the most limiting, the most restricting, the most difficult. I added those aren't actually names of Allah. I made those up. So just saying. Interest transactions are forbidden in Islam, which includes taking a house on mortgage. The majority of all contemporary scholars from around the globe, including Sheikh al-Buti, Sheikh Wahba, so on and so forth, Taqi Usmani, have declared mortgages to be unlawful, haram, even in the West, except in dire circumstances, right? Why wouldn't it be when Allah Almighty has declared war on those who involve themselves in this evil sin? Okay? The words of Sheikh al-Buti from Syria, the necessity which allows usurious loans is the same necessity which allows eating the meat of a dead animal, pig, and the like. In the case the one necessitated is exposed to perish from hunger, nakedness, or losing lodging, such is a necessity which makes prohibitions lawful. So every individual must look at himself whether he is in the same position as one who is in the fear of perishing due to hunger. If so, then one undoubtedly taking interest-bearing loan will be permissible. Otherwise, gaining worldly pleasures is too big a price to pay in return for the punishment in the hereafter. By looking at your case, I personally don't feel that you are in a situation where it would be permissible for you to purchase a house on mortgage. You may, for the short term, reside in a rented house with or without your husband. I don't know what that has to do with anything, with or without your husband. But nevertheless, let's continue. So, I hope I've made the case quite clearly that in Islam, I'm talking about Sunni Islam, but I'm sure it's similar in Shia Islam. Orthodox Sunni Islam does not allow Muslims to get mortgages. I've gone and shown you from 2 different websites that conventional mortgages are forbidden. And this is what I was taught as a Muslim, and this is what every practicing Muslim I know believes. Some of them do get mortgages. I'm not saying that nobody gets mortgages in Islam. I'm not saying every single Muslim never gets a mortgage. No. Muslims at different levels, a lot of them will do it and they'll say, well, it's not a big deal. Some of them will say, well, I didn't know how serious it was, and they'll actually, get out of the mortgage once they find out that it's actually how haram it is. I know one guy that was a real estate agent. This was his livelihood. He was making a lot of money, and only because he had to help people get mortgages as part of the selling of houses, he changed his whole life. He dropped out of real estate and he ended up running an Islamic school. I don't think that was a good decision he made. But nevertheless, people are taught that this is one of the worst sins, that this sin is worse than zina, adultery. This is a terrible, terrible sin, riba. And I've given examples from scholars that show that interest is a form of riba. Riba is not limited to interest, but as the hadith I showed you says, that you're not allowed to increase money for money of any amount, otherwise this would be riba. Okay? And it says in the Quran, and I'm gonna share a section from my blog post, that those who consume riba cannot stand except as one who stands being beaten by Satan into insanity. That is because they say trade is just like riba. But Allah has permitted trade and has forbidden riba. So whoever has received an admonition from his Lord and desists what have is past, and his affair rests with Allah. But whoever returns to riba, they are the companions of the fire. They will abide eternally therein. Quran 2:275. So I'm just showing that it's not just a hadith, it's in the Quran as well. I could go on and on explaining this. All you have to do is look up YouTube, go on YouTube or any website and look up riba, look up mortgage, interest. You will find it is completely haram and forbidden. Now, before I get into this anymore, I want to share a video about Islamic finance. Now, this is an example of a halal mortgage, so-called Islamic financing. And this is a scheme that is all over the world. This one is called Guidance Residential. It's in the US. Take a look.
You're a potential homeowner, and you need to understand how home financing works and what types of risks are involved in the process. For that, we need to take a closer look. The current financial system works like a factory that sells money for more money. When you go to purchase a home, a traditional bank will happily lend you the cash you need, add interest, and they'll even pass along all the inherent risks of home ownership to you as a bonus. So
Okay. Okay, let's continue. I'll let it go.
in the event you fall victim to a natural disaster, eminent domain, or a foreclosure, the burden to repay the full loan amount falls directly on you, with no one to help shoulder the load. Beyond its obvious shortcomings, lending and borrowing at interest is also in direct opposition to what all monotheistic faiths preach. There is
I've never heard of Christianity being against interest, okay? And Judaism does have some limitations of interest, but I don't believe it's a blanket ban like it is in Islam. As well, we'll talk about some of the points they made.
is, however, an alternative. Guidance Residential's declining balance co-ownership program is rooted in the traditional Islamic belief that money has no intrinsic value and thus can't be sold at a profit.
Say what? This money has no intrinsic value? What do you mean money has no intrinsic value? I think they meant money has no intrinsic time value. Still, that's odd. Because if you give someone your money, they can be using your money and you can't be using the money. So obviously there's a value in the money being with someone else. Like you want to build a house, you want to live your life, right? Someone lends you the money. They could be doing something with that money. They could be, never mind haram stuff, they could be doing halal stuff. Like they could be, buying a factory, a date factory, right? Dates don't come in factories. A date palm yard. What do people do? What halal things do people do? Buying dates and stuff. I don't know, like whatever, halal stuff.
The program is a non-lending method to facilitating home ownership.
Non-lending method, eh?
Through Guidance's co-ownership agreement, you purchased a home of your choice by entering into a diminishing partnership wherein your obligation is simple. You agree to buy out Guidance's shares while also paying a fee for using the portion of the property you do not yet own.
This sounds quite similar to how a regular bank mortgage works. You borrow the full amount of the home, and as you pay it off, you start paying less and less interest. Interesting. Usage fee, eh?
As your ownership increases over time, the portion of your monthly payment dedicated to this rental condition decreases.
Well, look at that. Your mortgage decreases as you pay it off? Wow, what an amazing system. Who would have thought that you can actually come up with a system like this? Sounds strangely familiar to another system I know, though.
What makes this better? You can fully buy out Guidance's shares at any time without a prepayment penalty.
Okay, prepayment penalty. So now, part of the reason why traditional conventional mortgages are cheaper is because you are guaranteeing that you will pay it for at least 5 years. So this is a period where you agree that for the next 5 years you will make monthly payments, and you can have an additional 10% you can pay off every year, for example, based on the agreement you come up with the bank. But you can't pay off the whole mortgage in less than 5 years, or whatever period you come up with, typically 5 years. There are such things as open mortgages. And yes, there's no prepayment penalty, but you end up paying much more because the bank doesn't know how much profit they're going to get. And because it's just wide open, the price is more. So it makes sense, right? There's like if you're making a long-term contract with them, they can give it to you for cheaper. It just makes perfect sense, right? So obviously this is going to be more expensive. You can see
If you're
that.
late making a payment, you don't need to worry about the typical 5% late fee that traditional banks charge and profit off of.
So this, I think, is being a little bit dishonest now, because if you didn't pay your mortgage, are they going to pay for it? They're going to cover the loss?
Our reminder fee of $50 or less covers
So you can just miss your payment and pay $50? Sounds a little bit unbelievable to me.
our administrative cost and never compounds. In the event
really?
of default, Guidance will only reclaim its share from the sale of the property, whereas other institutions typically pursue you for any proceeds not covered by the sale of the home.
Okay, so again, this feels a little bit dishonest. If a home goes into default, if you don't pay your mortgage, the bank will sell the house, you will get back your share that you own. Okay, so if you put a 20% down payment, you will get that back. If over the last 2 or 3 years you paid off another $40,000, $50,000 or whatever it is, you will get that back as well.
Should the property be lost due to a situation involving something outside the two parties like eminent domain or a natural disaster, Guidance will share equity loss equal to the percentage of our ownership. With Guidance,
I'm not sure how this is different from a bank mortgage, because even with a bank mortgage, if you own 20%, they own 80%, there's a natural disaster, you just have to pay back the 80%. Whereas in this case, they're saying they'll share in the loss. I don't totally understand what they mean, because the house is gone. You paid 20%. I'm not totally sure what happens in that case, but with the bank, you still owe them that amount.
Guidance Residential, you don't have to worry about the worst case scenario. We're here to share the risks and benefits of owning a home with you. It's something we like to call modern finance with timeless values.
So I do think that the devil is in the details here, and it's not enough to make all these big claims, because the devil is often in the details. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share some actual Islamic mortgage contracts and show you that even though in theory there are some benefits to having this shared ownership thing, in reality what ends up happening is in many cases the Islamic bank will end up taking all of the burden and pushing it on you, and all of the risk and pushing it on you and making you agree to it, because in an Islamic agreement, theoretically you're sharing the risk because it's a partnership, but in reality they can put whatever they want in the contract, which means in reality you are actually taking all the risk, right? And there's some examples of this. I had actually done a review as a Muslim on this one Islamic financing company in Toronto area. Actually they're all over Canada, and I actually had a few friends tell me that I shouldn't post this review because it makes this Islamic financing companies look bad. But I still did it because I felt like if we're going to let these people off with running bad businesses, then we're not going to improve, and these people need to be held accountable for what's going on, right? So I have this review that I did, and I ended up calculating how expensive it is. The biggest downside is everything is done in secrecy. It's run like an uncle's club. The problem with most of the Islamic financing companies here is it's all very mysterious how it works, what you're paying. Some people end up paying a lot, some people end up paying much less, so it's very inconsistent, it's very secretive, nobody actually knows how much they're paying. I actually ended up calculating, I posed as a buyer because I wanted to know how much it's going to cost. They didn't even want to tell me anything, but they did end up giving me the information based on an actual house. I had to submit an actual house that I wanted to buy, and based on that they actually told me what the rent would be. And they weren't so happy that I was trying to kind of scout and find out what the actual details were. I even got an actual mortgage contract, which I managed to find online, but it's actually an old one, so I don't have the latest one. But basically what it says is like all of the so-called theoretical benefits that you would have, they're all gone. So members/occupants agree that they are solely responsible for any loss or damage to the land. Right? Members, occupants also acknowledge this agreement does not confer upon them an interest in the land, any proprietary rights or other rights, right? Except for what's made in the agreement with the cooperative, right? Basically, they agree that this occupancy by members, occupants does not create any landlord and tenant relationship with them, so you can't sue them for being a bad landlord, even though theoretically, you're paying them rent, but they're saying you don't get the rights of a tenant, and basically they're saying that the payment of occupancy charges, aka rent, which is the equivalent of interest, will not be considered any subscription by them towards the purchase of shares in the cooperative. So they're saying they have to agree that this payment actually counts as a share. They also force you to insure the property to make sure if anything happens, they're covered. And they will not actually rent to you if there's any risk, if they think that the price of the house will go down. If you manage to pay off the entire house by buying these shares over time, what ends up happening is once the house is paid off, if you had borrowed 50% or more of the house price, then you have to buy an additional share with 10% or 20% of the increase in the house price. So if the house price has doubled over the time that you're living in there, you have to pay an additional 20% of the increase. And in some cases, you have to pay double the HST or the tax, because the ownership changes from their hands to your hands, and then they pay tax, which you have to pay, and then they pay tax again to give it to you, which you have to pay again. So it ends up being double the tax. But again, some jurisdictions, they manage to work around that. But the fact is that this is actually a pretty terrible agreement for anyone. Now, I'm going to show you another example of another type of Islamic finance product called ijara loan. So there's an ijara loans company, and what they do is even more dubious. So what they do is they take an existing mortgage, or like a regular mortgage, right? And they can convert it into a halal mortgage, right? And what do they say here? A conversion essentially changes the nature of the transaction from a rent on money transaction, riba, to rent on property transaction, ijara. Now, how do they do that? What they do is they take your mortgage, or they give you a new mortgage that you sign with the bank for this property, but instead of signing it in your name, you sign it in the name of a trust. Then the trust that is basically you, rents the house back to you on this so-called halal scheme. But there's still an interest transaction going on behind the scenes that's covered in this halal contract. Now you might ask, how is this halal? I have an interest transaction behind the scenes. How is this halal? Well, let me tell you how it's halal. So here you go. The scholars have blessed this transaction of taking the riba and hiding it and effectively making it halal. Now, if this doesn't smell fishy enough for you, now at least with the Ansar Financial and Guidance Residential, there actually is a difference in the sense that there's actually the bank that's buying the house and actually renting it back to you. But effectively, it ends up being very similar, right? Other than a few small things like you can pay it off at any time, which again, you can get with a conventional mortgage. But this so-called halal ijara contract is so dubious. Let's look at the calculator. So what I've done is I've opened a conventional mortgage calculator from RBC Royal Bank, and for $520,000 and at 3.39%, which is the interest rate at the moment for 25 years. And this is a mortgage payment. And as you can see, I did the same thing on the Ijara Financial, and it comes out to being almost exactly the same, $25.72 a month versus $25.66 a month. So they added another $9 a month or so. And as well, it ends up being almost the exact same thing. You end up for the same amount of time paying off the same amount, right? It comes up to $771,000 for the home, which is almost exactly what you end up with the conventional mortgage, because like $249,000 for the interest cost, which is again almost the same as what you would pay with the ijara. So how is this possibly halal? How is this possibly advantageous? At least if you're gonna get a mortgage, just get a mortgage. Don't try to pretend to yourself as halal and fool yourself into thinking that you're doing something good by paying this company to basically make you feel less guilty for doing something that's perfectly normal and perfectly fine and doesn't hurt anybody, buying a house, right? So now that we looked at that, let's just look at what are the advantages of actually buying a house versus renting. Because if you're renting your whole life, let's say you can't get these crazy halal financing options, because for example, there's so many limitations when it comes to the halal financing. Like there's ISNA financing, and there's Ansar Housing and HCHC and all of these companies. And then there was another company as well. Okay, I'll talk about the other company later. But looking at these companies, they like Ansar Housing when I looked into it, was only offering $225,000 or so of financing, which is very little. That means if your house is $500,000, you got to have, more than half of that cash, which almost nobody has, right? Conventional mortgages, you're looking at 5% down, 10% down, up to 20% down. But with these mortgages, it's almost impossible, because you have to be very, very rich, right, in order to be able to do that. So it's quite difficult, right? It's honestly very difficult to get this. If you go for the ijara loans, you're basically getting a mortgage, that's wrapped up, and with a regular bank that's just covered as pretending to be halal, right? But let's say you can't afford this, let's say you can't get this, and let's say you end up like me. I was renting for most of my life, okay, until I basically left Islam, and then maybe like a year later, I was able to buy a house for the first time with the bank, because I was no longer burdened. I no longer felt that this was, something bad. And the only reason I thought it was bad in the first place was because my religion was telling me that this is so bad. But what's so bad about it, right? And so let's look at the example of buying a house versus renting. Okay, so there are so many advantages to buying a house. You are the king of the castle. You get to decide the rules of your house. Nobody can tell you, you can do this, you can't do this. You can make modifications to the home. For example, in my case, I got solar panels on the roof, right? And I'm able to make a little bit of money from the solar panels and actually contribute to a greener, cleaner earth. As well, nobody is going to kick me out because they want to move in, or because the family member is going to come in. The mortgage amount actually continues to drop, whereas the rent amount continues to increase. When I was last renting, it was around $1,500 to $1,600 a month for a small townhouse, and now I have a 4-bedroom home that is actually quite sufficient for my family. Just to look at the payments, and this is something people don't understand. They don't realize that over time, the payments actually go down. So if you look at the amortization table on a mortgage calculator, you can actually see that what starts out as around $2,500 a month, which is $1,500 a month of interest. Now, already on this house, this is less than what I would pay in rent, the $1,500. Now, of course, there's other costs as well, for example, property tax and stuff. But like the actual total amount is actually not a lot more than what I'd be paying as rent. And then I'm paying the principal. That actually means that the mortgage is getting paid off. This money that I paid to the bank, I get to keep it. I get it back if I ever sell the house, right? In my case, from 2016 until 2019, for the house that I'm living in, I've paid off $70,000. If I sell the house, even if the house didn't increase in price, I am $70,000 richer. My family has money. Now, if I was renting, I would be forced to save that money every month, keep it aside, and hope that I actually have that money. And not just that, my house price has gone up, right? House prices tend to go up over time. If you look at this house price index, right, starting at, let's say this is in Toronto, in June 2005, if you look at the prices the index being 100, between 2005 and now, we're talking about a 2.5 times increase in the index, right? On average, you can see house prices did drop at one point, right? You can see there's a drop there. But if you look at the trend, if you look at the average, year after year after year, the prices tend to go up. There's another advantage to buying, which is called... So never mind the fact that I've paid off, in my case, $70,000 over so many years, which I would probably not have because I would have spent it. The house that I live in has gone up in value around $200,000, right? I mean, maybe even $300,000. So, like there is a possibility that the house prices can go down, like I said, but on average, they tend to go up. There are exceptions to the rule, but this is another advantage of buying a house. It's another advantage of buying versus renting. I know somebody who lives in downtown Toronto, a good Muslim friend of mine. He never bought a house because of this very reason. He saved cash. He worked in a very lucrative IT job. He saved a lot of money, and he finally managed to buy a house a few years ago, but not in downtown Toronto where he wanted to live. Far, far away, right? Like over 100 kilometers away from the downtown core. And why did he do that? Because he had no choice. That's all he can afford, right? That's all he could get. And the place that his kids grew up, that he spent, that he's working and avoiding the commute. He could have bought a house when it was dirt cheap, and he could have had a good asset on his balance sheet now. And if he would have died, he would have had a home for his kids. If I die now, I have insurance policy that covers the remainder of the mortgage. Compare that to renting. If I would have died when I'm renting, there is nothing left over for the family, for the kids, for them. But now the family gets a house completely paid off, and my wife has that much less to worry about, right? She would have a home and the kids would have a home. But if I was renting, they would have nothing, right? They would have nothing. They'd be dependent at the mercy of the community to help them. So how is that a good thing? Like, how is this Islamic system of any use? What about for the bank? Some people think that having a mortgage is actually maybe bad for the bank. Well, no, it's not actually bad for the bank. It's actually better for the bank. The bank, first of all, has access to a lot of funds. For example, GICs, short-term deposits, even the money in your bank account, they use that and they lend it out. And because they have all this money, they can give it to you at a cheaper price, which is why the bank mortgages at the moment tend to be quite cheap, like 2%, 3%. And it's been that way for many years now, right? And it doesn't look like it's going to increase anytime soon. It might go up to 3%, 4%, 5%. But overall, they can afford to give you a really low price because there's a down payment. The risk is all handled. The risk is taken care of because there's a down payment. So if you don't pay the bank mortgage, they can sell the house and they can use the deposit that you gave them, the down payment, to make sure that they don't lose anything. So because of this, because there's so little risk in this arrangement, you get a dirt cheap mortgage. And who is benefiting here? The bank is happy. They're making a little bit of money, 1%, 2%, 3%. I'm happy because I can actually afford to live in a house that is actually good for me and my family. And everybody is happy. Like, this is such a good system, right? Now, what about the crash? What about the insane crash, right? What about, is there any downsides to riba, to mortgages, to anything, right? Like any of this stuff, right? And yes, actually, there is some downsides as well, right? I do agree that excessive interest, for example, those cash money loans, 19 to 20%, 30 to 80% in some cases, they're exorbitant. They're basically gouging customers. This is bad. I think this is bad. I think that department store cards that charge 30%, I think, businesses that take advantage of vulnerable populations and they try to rip them off. Sometimes rent-to-own schemes are exactly what this is. Sometimes they're beneficial, but usually they're taking advantage of poor populations that can't do any better. So this is some of the bad things in conventional finance. So as I was asking, if interest is so bad, who is being harmed with a bank mortgage? I think a bank mortgage is a perfect example of a situation where both the buyer and the seller, or the lender in this case, are benefiting, right? Everybody's better off with this cheap bank mortgage, right? Yes, there are use cases where I think it makes sense to put some limitations, for example, to protect the customer. For example, credit cards need to have, limits put on them and stuff like that. But the problem with Islam is it throws out the baby with the bathwater. It's throwing out all the good that comes out of this lending system. And what does it give you in return? It doesn't give you much of an alternative. And so what you end up finding is that the situation is much worse off for Muslims, right? Who end up following these rules, who end up not getting a mortgage, all because they want to please Allah, right? And in conclusion, in summary, I just want to go through this. You can have a much better house by buying. You have peace of mind. You don't have landlords kicking you out. You can make renovations. You can make customizations. You can, do what you like with your home. It saves you money as the amount you pay for each year drops year after year. First year, with the calculations I have on my blog, starts at $1,300 a month in interest. By 10 years, you're paying half. Talk about like something that's beneficial in the long run. Compare that to, for example, the rent. Rents keep going up. We're talking about what I was paying before, $1,600 is now $2,000 a month, and we're talking about maybe for a townhouse or something, right? So there's peace of mind, there's so many advantages to actually just getting like a conventional mortgage. There's advantages to the bank, the house value increases over time, and overall it's just so much better. These ijara mortgages are basically scams because it's just hiding the fact that it's just a conventional mortgage. These other Islamic mortgages are very difficult. You have to come up with high down payments in order to actually use them. They end up putting a lot of negative conditions which are harmful to you, and end up making the whole thing just basically like, they take advantage of, again, a population that's desperate to avoid paying riba, and so they end up signing these deals which are terrible, terrible deals, right? It's terrible for the customer. All the risk ends up eventually coming back on you. Any increase in price, they end up taking it, part of it as well. And they put all these limitations on you. They don't let you do what you want with the home. You can't even if you increase the value of the home because you renovated it, they end up taking some of that increase, which is so ridiculous, right? And so the only reason why anyone would agree to such a bad deal like this is because they're desperate, right? And so that's what they end up doing. These so-called products are often just no better for the customer. They're no more ethical, they're no more beneficial. Yet the so-called Islamic scholars are blessing these things and saying they're halal, even though they actually end up, making people's lives the worse off. I personally know a family that has an Islamic mortgage and they end up paying far more than they need to. The house is much smaller than it needs to be. There's so many restrictions they have on it, and all for nothing, all for pleasing Allah, all for pleasing this imaginary God that so supposedly made these rules back in the 7th century. Like, I'm pretty sure that Muhammad did not know that interest would have become such a big part of people's lives and such a big part of the whole system, and how there's actually advantages to using it. It fits in well in a system, in our world, right? And which is why it's become so popular. It fits well. It handles the problem of the money value, of the time value of money, which is why it's become like a global thing. So that's all I have for now. If you managed to make it all the way to the end, this was a long video. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe. I'm going to keep making videos on the topic of Islam. And stay tuned. This is Abdullah Samir signing out. Thank you for watching. If you'd like to support me so I can continue making such videos, please check out my support page at abdullahsamir.com/support. Even a few bucks can help out. It can help me to buy new equipment, purchase licenses for the software that I need and for the web hosting and for advertising, and to keep food on the table for the family. I would love to do this more regularly, but it takes a lot of time, and I also have a full-time job. Thank you so much to everyone who continues to support me, whether financially or otherwise, and stay tuned. Thank you, everyone. This is Abdullah Samir signing out.